Hey everyone, I'm back. This is Steve of Steve's Sleeve. I'm going into session number 10 now. If you haven't listened to sessions 1 through 9, please, I ask you to stop and listen to those first. Obviously, if you're not able to pick up the sessions, then just subscribe. It makes it much easier because they're all there. And I'm picking up on the end of what I said in session number 9, and that is we were dealing with how sin came in through our natural father's sperm at conception, while at the same time our eternal spirit, or the real part of us, was being woven. Psalm 139 was being woven into the womb of our mothers in our little bodies as we were being conceived. And that spirit which came from God was originally alive, because nothing from God has any death or sin in it. In fact, the scripture says that every good and perfect gift comes from above, from the Father of lights, in whom there's no variation or shadow of turning. This is also the reason why the scripture says, and this is I'm coming to this verse, I'm going to expound on it, but in Romans chapter 5 and verse 9, it says, once I was alive. Once I was alive. Once I was alive. There was a time when I was alive. And the I here, I will show you shortly, that this scripture is not referring to your physical body, but it is referring to your eternal spirit that came out of God or from God. We are his offspring. When you entered planet Earth through the natural physical birth canal of your mother, your eternal spirit, which had been knitted into your flesh at conception, according to Psalm 139, and which came directly from God, was alive unto God. This is one of the reasons why children's spirits go back to God if they die prematurely, or if they die before they reach an age of accountability or an age of understanding and reason. However, as a baby, on the inside of your little physical body lay an insidious virus called sin, waiting patiently to be triggered, waiting for the time in which it would deceive you. I'm not making this up. I'll show you exactly from scripture. Your very spirit, the real you, the invisible you, the eternal you, was there in a place, and a place of perfection, but this virus was waiting to separate the real you from your original spiritual father, namely God. Now, before you have a valve bounce and scream blasphemy, let me prove this to be true directly from the scriptures, which is the only foundation to go to. Go back to Romans chapter 5, and for your sake, if you haven't done so yet, get a Bible if you do not have one. Okay, are you ready for this? Get ready now. Take a deep breath. Open to Romans chapter 5 and verse 9. You're about to read an earth-shakingly powerful scripture with me, and on understanding how sin actually works. Romans chapter 7 verse 9. Once I was alive apart from the law, but when the commandment, or when the law came, sin sprang to life and I died. There was a very specific moment in the time of your history on planet Earth where sin, which came in and was waiting, was triggered. And the trigger was the law. The trigger was the commandment. Read it again for yourself. And when the commandment came, when you were at an age of accountability and could understand the difference between good and evil, and making the right decision and the wrong decision, at that point in time, sin sprang to life and I died. The writer here in verse 9 is not talking about your physical body dying. If he was talking about your physical body, then he would have died physically on the spot, and obviously would never have been able to write the book of Romans. So we do not die physically the first time we are consciously old enough to make a decision to break the law and sin. In other words, when we realize the law comes to us and we understand that there is something that's saying, you cannot, thou shalt not. At that point in time, scripture says sin, that's the trigger. Sin jumps up. Sin is revived. Sin comes alive. And it deceives me. let me take it a little bit further. When Jesus was talking to Nicodemus, this was a Jewish leader in the Gospel of John chapter 3 of the New Testament. Jesus, told Nicodemus that Nicodemus, had to be born again. And then Jesus had to explain to this Jewish leader or authority that he was not talking about physical rebirth. Because Nicodemus kept asking him, but how do I enter back into my mother's womb? He's thinking in the natural realm. He's thinking in the seen realm. But Jesus is saying, I'm talking about spiritual rebirth. Read it yourself in John chapter 3. See, some people think we make up this word born again. Well, let me tell you this. You cannot do something again if you have not done it in the first place or done it before. You have to do it first. And then when you do it again, you've done it again. Jesus said you have to be born again. He didn't say you have to be born. He said you have to be born again. You had to have been born before and then died. So again, once you were alive, as you came from God, Romans chapter 5 and verse 9. But in the course of time, courtesy of the sin virus which sprung out at a particular point in time, something dramatically went wrong that required that God had to intervene in order to rebirth or redeem, return to original owner, that which was originally born alive but which had subsequently died. Now, the I referred to in Romans chapter 5 and verse 9 is your eternal spirit and soul, the real you. Once you, the real you, was alive. And this was before what has been explained in the verse happened to you. You were alive, but something happened, and it involved not only sin springing up and deceiving you after being dormant for so long, but it also involved the perfect commandment which came from God. The commandments, the commandment of God was the trigger. Ironically, the commandment which is perfect was the trigger that caused sin to come alive and caused you to sin. That sin which was hidden in you caused it to spring up and kill you, to kill your spirit. And let me add at this point that spiritual death does not mean that your spirit ceases to exist. It means that your spirit was contaminated by that sin virus due to this deceptive event. And as a result, your spirit was separated from God because God cannot be one with sin. Spiritual death is separation from God. God cannot and will not have union with sin. A contaminated spirit has first to be freed from the effects of sin before it can once again have access and intimacy with God. Your spirit has to be born again. Now let me repeat. This is why Jesus himself spoke of being born again in John chapter 3. You have to have first been born alive spiritually and then die spiritually in order to be born again spiritually. Think about it. And very clearly, when Jesus spoke of being born again in John chapter 3, he went on to clarify to Nicodemus that he was not referring to the flesh, the natural physical realm, but to that of the invisible eternal realm. Because he told Nicodemus, I'm not talking about entering back into your natural mother. I'm not talking about the physical realm, I'm talking about the spiritual realm. But here's the thing, did you notice that the commandment was the cause of sin's uprising, according to Romans 5 verse 9? God's perfect law, ironically, was the trigger to cause sin to begin to operate. So now here, let me just end this session with this. I'm going to do a session that speaks on the title of the session is going to be Why Religion Can Be Such a Deadly Virus. And you're going to find out that most people are trying desperately to obey a commandment or the commandments to be accepted by God, when it was the actual commandment that caused sin to be triggered, to cause your spirit to be separated. And as a result, you can never ever get to God by trying to be a good person. You have to be born again. And that's what I'm going to start to talk to you about in the next session. But religion says you have to try and work your way into God's favor. Whereas God says it's already too late. You have to take what Jesus did on the Calvary in order to be set free. That's what I'm going to talk about. I'll see you in session 11.